My golden sister and her fiancé asked me to split their inheritance after their wedding. When my parents sided with them, I revealed a dark family secret. My name is Olivia. I'm 30 years old. I used to think that if I were good enough, independent enough, then my parents' love would come to me like a natural reward. But the older I got, the more I realized, in some families, love isn't distributed fairly, it's handed out based on favorites. And, in my family, that order of favoritism always started with one name: Emma. I was the eldest. Since I was 16, I had been working after school selling coffee, babysitting, helping clean my parents' bakery. No one forced me to do it. But no one stopped me either. They just nodded, patted my shoulder, and said, "You're the big sister, you should set an example." At first, I felt useful and I liked that feeling. I thought that if I didn't ask for money, didn't cause trouble, didn't make a fuss, then at the very least, I'd earn respect. Emma was different. From a young age, she had this invisible glow around her. Mom signed her up for ballet, singing lessons, French classes, all the things I once dreamed of but never dared to ask for. Because I knew the answer was always, "We're tight on money." But somehow, that tightness only showed up when I wanted something. When Emma wanted a new tutu or a summer ballet camp in another state, suddenly my parents would find a way. I remember when Emma turned 10. Mom hired someone to dress up as a Disney princess to host her backyard birthday party. There was a 3-tier cake, mini fireworks, and even a small live band made up of Dad's friends. I was 14, standing silently with a camera in hand, taking photos of her, and later, I was the one who cut the cake for the little guests while Mom was busy entertaining the adults. 2 months later, on my birthday, Mom left a small slice of cake on the kitchen table with a note that read, "Happy birthday, I'm working the night shift." I ate it alone, no candles, no gifts. Just the flickering kitchen light above. I never blamed Emma. She never asked to be the center of the universe. But she never turned down the role either. She got used to being praised, pampered, forgiven. When she broke Mom's crystal vase, I was the first to be questioned. When she skipped school to see her first boyfriend, I was the one reminded. "You're her sister. You should teach her to be better." I lived in a strange kind of silence where everything I did right was expected and everything she did wrong came with a charming excuse. I got into college with a full scholarship. I studied and worked part-time, saving every penny to get by. A few years later, Emma chose to major in performing arts. When she failed to secure a scholarship, my parents said, "It's okay, as long as she gets to live her passion." They took on more debt to pay her tuition. And me? I never dared to borrow a dime, afraid of being called a burden. My grandfather was the only one who truly saw me. He used to secretly slip me some pocket money, tucked into coat pockets or hidden in old cookie tins. He didn't say much, but he often reminded me, "You don't have to shout to be seen, Olivia. People with true light don't need the spotlight." When he passed away, it was the only time I felt like someone had just snuffed out the last candle inside me. The will was read 3 weeks after the funeral. The lawyer announced that my grandfather had left me a savings account. It wasn't a huge amount, but enough for someone to start something of their own. I cried when I left the lawyer's office, not because of the money, but because of what it meant to be remembered, to be seen. But from that day on, no one in the family ever mentioned the money again, as if it had never existed. My parents didn't ask what I planned to do with it. Emma didn't seem to care. I didn't push for their attention either. I figured I'd use it when the time came, maybe to start a business or buy a small place of my own. I never imagined I'd have to defend what was mine, not until the day of Emma's wedding. The story truly begins again that night, when people raised glasses to celebrate my little sister and called it the happiest day of her life. And I, the one who once shared every dream, every meal, every pair of shoes with her, was suddenly asked to share the one last thing our grandfather had left just for me. No thank you, no hesitation. Just a casual request, for the sake of family. And that's when I realized, some things, if you don't stand up for them, others will treat as yours to sacrifice by default. Dinner that night took place at the usual Italian restaurant, the one our parents always chose for special occasions. The long table was set by the glass window, candlelight dancing on the surface of red wine glasses. Emma sat in the center like a little queen newly crowned, and Logan, with his polished look and perfectly timed words, didn't take his eyes off his new wife for a second. I sat slightly off to the side, quiet as usual. I wasn't planning to say anything until Emma, while cutting into her lasagna, looked up and said in a light, casual voice, "Oh, I just remembered the money Grandpa left for the two of us." I was too young to care back then, but now that I think about it, what a blessing, huh? Then she smiled, turning to Logan like she was planting a seed. Logan set down his fork and shrugged. "Yeah, if Olivia doesn't need it right now, maybe we could use half of it as a deposit for the apartment." He laughed, that kind of half-joke people use to test the waters before they decide whether to push further or back off. The whole table chuckled politely, but no one disagreed. I looked up, chopsticks frozen in midair. And then, the next thing my mother said felt like a splash of cold water straight to my face. "It's good to share a little with your sister. After all, the money was from Grandpa for both of you, no need to be so rigid about splitting it, right?" She said it as if she were gently suggesting I give up the last piece of bread, not asking me to split my inheritance. I don't remember how I kept eating. Everything went hazy. I smiled faintly, nodded out of politeness, then focused on folding my napkin as if that small act could anchor me against the rising tide in my chest. No one noticed the silence. They kept talking about furniture, a delayed honeymoon, and a small startup Emma was thinking about. The next day, I got a message from my mother. "I just hope you girls know how to love each other. Your sister just got married, it's going to be tough. If you can help, no one's forcing you." It wasn't a long message, but long enough to guilt me. Then came one from my father. "I think you should try to see the bigger picture. Life is about giving, sweetheart. Grandpa really loved Logan, didn't he?" I didn't reply. But I started to feel suffocated. Then came the others. My youngest aunt. A cousin I hadn't heard from in ages. Suddenly calling to check on me, ending with, "I heard about the savings your grandfather left you. That's really special, congratulations." I felt like I had been placed on a stage I never auditioned for, cast into a role where saying no made me the villain, but saying yes made me a puppet. I couldn't decide which was worse. Emma called me on Thursday night, just after I got off work. I was sitting in my car, parked in front of my house. Her voice was light as a feather, beginning with a vague, unfinished sentence, "Are you okay?" Then, without waiting for my answer, she continued, "I was just thinking, if you really love your family, then money shouldn't matter, right?" She paused, as if giving me time to feel guilty, then added, "I don't want to pressure you. It's just Logan and I are going through a rough patch, and we haven't asked anyone else. You're the only one we truly trust." I swallowed hard. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because any response I gave would be used against me, painted as heartless or selfish. So I simply said, "Let me think about it," and ended the call. But I knew this wasn't a request. It was a trap, a guilt game, and if I said no, I'd be the one accused of destroying family harmony. From that moment, I felt like I was under surveillance. Every message, every call, felt like a tightening noose. Every check-in came loaded with expectations and unspoken implications. People no longer asked how I was doing. They asked, "So what are you planning to do with your share?" I thought of my grandfather. Of that last afternoon, I sat with him, listening to stories from his youth. He had spent his life saving up what little he could not so I could share it for the family, but so I could have something to start with when no one else was around. And now, the last thing he left for me was being turned into some kind of moral test. I started to wonder, if I said no, would I really be the bad one? Or would it just be the first time I chose to keep what was mine? I thought things would stop at subtle hints, a few suggestive texts, maybe some fake concerned calls. But I was wrong. Very wrong. The following weekend, Mom called. "Can you come by for a bit? There's something the family needs to discuss." Her tone was gentle as always, but I sensed something different. It wasn't concern. It was preparation. When I arrived, the table had already been set. Not for a casual meal, it felt like a planned meeting. Dad sat at the head of the table, Mom beside him, and unsurprisingly, Emma and Logan were already there. Emma smiled at me like everything was fine. Logan gave a small nod, eyes avoiding mine. I sat down, placed my bag on the chair beside me, and felt a storm begin to build in my chest. Dad spoke first. We just wanted to have a calm conversation about something. I know you're not thrilled when people bring up Grandpa's money. But the more we think about it, the more it seems if you were to share just a small part, not half, just 40%, it would be both considerate and reasonable. Think of it as a wedding gift for your sister, and a way to keep peace in the family. I looked at him, not with anger, just disappointment. Then I turned to Mom, who hadn't said a word. She was calmly pouring tea, her expression oddly serene. I asked, my voice steady but firm, "So, what do you think, Mom?" My mother set the teapot down and replied softly, "You have the right to say no. But sometimes, sharing a little is how we show love. No one's forcing you. It's just how you choose to act will be how everyone comes to understand who you are." I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm. I understand. So, let me make this clear once and for all. This was something Grandpa left specifically for me. And I will not be sharing any of it. Not because I'm selfish, but because no one here has even asked why he left it just for me. All anyone seems to care about is how much I'm willing to give up. The room fell silent. Emma looked at me, gave a half smile, then turned away. No one said another word. I stood up, thanked them for the meal, though I hadn't touched a bite, and walked out of the house I once grew up in. But it didn't end there. The next day, the messages started coming in. "Olivia, why are you making such a big deal? She just got married. Young couples need help these days. You're single, it's not like you have that kind of pressure. Oh, do. Heard you're refusing to share even a small portion? That's hard to understand." I didn't reply to any of them, but every word clung to me like dust. The more I tried to shake them off, the more they settled. One Wednesday afternoon, I was parked behind a grocery store. My half-eaten salad sat untouched on the passenger seat. I wasn't hungry, but I didn't have the strength to finish it either. For a week now, I'd been living inside a storm, trapped in a play I didn't audition for, the only one who didn't belong on that stage. And just then, my phone buzzed with a message from someone I never expected. Aunt Myra. She was my father's younger sister, the only woman in the family who ever looked at me without the lens of "the eldest must sacrifice." At every family gathering, she was always the first to ask me, "How's work? Are you taking care of yourself?" Not out of politeness, but because she truly cared. When I got into college, she sent me a leather-bound journal with a note inside. "Don't let anyone make you feel like living for yourself is wrong." She was never loud, never intrusive, just a quiet presence in the background, always there to lift me up when I felt like disappearing. Her message was just one line. "I don't know if you want to hear this, but I think you should." Attached was an audio file. I tapped play, not knowing what to expect. But in just a few seconds, everything Emma had built, the sweet words, the gentle gestures, the facade of doing it for the family, crumbled to dust. Emma's voice came through, sharp and cold. "As long as Mom and Dad pressure Olivia hard enough, we can get at least 30%. She's weak. Just pretending to be strong. Don't worry, babe, it'll all fall into place. Just keep the sad face on around Mom and Dad, they'll cave." I couldn't breathe. I stopped the recording, but her voice kept echoing in my mind like a blade. My hands trembled, not from rage, but because the last layer of trust I'd been holding on to had just collapsed. I leaned back in my seat, my forehead resting against the steering wheel. The car was silent, filled only with the hum of the AC and my own sharp breathing. I could never cry in front of them, never. But in that cramped space, I broke down like a child. I cried because I felt lost inside the very family I had tried so hard to hold together. I cried because I realized that all those years of trying to be good, never asking for anything, never causing trouble, still weren't enough to earn respect. I cried because, for the first time, I wished my grandfather were still alive so I could have just one person standing beside me, even if it was just a glance, a nod, a hand resting on my shoulder without needing to say a word. I missed him. I remembered my graduation, how thin and frail he looked, yet still rose to his feet and walked over to me, placing his hand on my shoulder and saying, "You've done well. You don't need anyone's approval to know your worth." Lolk. At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. But now hearing Emma's voice so cold and calculated, realizing that even my parents were playing a role in this, I did. I had only one thing left: the truth. And one person like Aunt Myra who still believed in me, who quietly stood by me, just like Grandpa once did. I wiped my tears and sat up straight. Something inside me began to shift, not rage, but a deep realization that if I stayed silent, they would never stop. And for the first time in my life, I knew with certainty I wouldn't let them write this story for me anymore. From now on, I hold the pen. The next day, I took a half-day off work and drove into the city to the law office. The building was 6 stories of glass and steel, cold and impersonal, not the kind of place you'd expect to seek justice. But I only needed one thing: confirmation that I wasn't crazy. That what I was trying to protect was truly mine, not just me being stubborn, as they claimed. My lawyer was a woman in her early 40s, petite, with her hair neatly tied up and eyes sharper than anyone I'd ever met. Her name was Clara. It took her 5 minutes to review the copy of the will, the one my grandfather had sent me last year, and she confirmed everything in a firm, steady voice. "Miss Olivia, this inheritance is a personal asset left directly to you by the deceased, not held jointly or through any intermediary. No one, not your parents, siblings, or anyone's fiancé, has any legal claim to this unless you provide written consent. To put it plainly, unless you sign something yourself, no one can touch a cent." I nodded, silent. I felt lighter, not because I had won, but because, for the first time, I had something solid beneath my feet. I asked Clara one final thing. "If they keep pressuring me through words or social behavior, does that count as harassment?" Clara looked at me, serious. "It depends on the degree. But if you feel emotionally cornered, mentally threatened, or your reputation is being harmed, start collecting evidence. Recordings, texts, witness accounts, even vague social media posts. We'll know what to do." 1. I walked out of the office with a USB drive, a printed confirmation letter, and something new blooming quietly inside me. Not anger, but dignity, freshly awakened. That evening, I began organizing everything. I created a new folder on my computer and titled it Boundaries. I downloaded every message from Mom, from Dad, from aunts, uncles, cousins, and saved each one Emma had sent. I clipped the audio file from Aunt Myra, added timestamps and dates. Even the passive-aggressive remarks from the last family video call. I started recording any conversation where my name came up. I didn't go online to clap back. I didn't post vague statuses. I didn't ask anyone to take my side. The only thing I did was write a letter. A handwritten one, addressed to the house I once called home. It wasn't long. It wasn't angry. It didn't accuse. It was simply a truth, the kind a daughter says out loud when her heart has been turned into a battleground. "Dear Mom and Dad, I know you think I'm overreacting. But if refusing to share my inheritance makes me selfish in your eyes, then maybe what family means to you has become very different from what it means to me. I've been cast as the villain, not because I did anything wrong, but because I refused to surrender. I haven't taken anything from anyone. I'm just protecting what's mine. And if my silence all these years was mistaken as agreement, then from now on, I will no longer be silent. Please understand, this isn't rebellion. It's the first time I'm learning how to set boundaries. Olivia." I sealed the envelope myself and dropped it in the neighborhood mailbox. Not because I wanted to be formal, but because I no longer wanted to hear their defensive voices cutting me off over the phone. I needed quiet enough for them to read every word. Enough that they couldn't interrupt. 2 days passed. No reply. Not a word from Mom. No missed calls from Dad. No explanations. No pushback. Just silence, but this time, it carried something heavier, refusal to listen. I knew they had read it. Because that night, I saw Emma's new Instagram post. A wedding photo with the caption, "Family is not just blood, it's those who stand with you when others turn their backs." I didn't need to read the comments. I knew exactly who that message was for. And I knew, behind that picture of two clasped hands was something else entirely, a warning. She wasn't backing down. But this time, I was ready. I started living with more clarity, not out of fear, but out of awareness. I didn't strike first, but I observed. I documented, and I defended every inch of what was mine, like a quiet warrior. I learned how to say no without attaching an apology. I learned how to walk out of a room without offering an explanation. I learned to believe that I didn't need to please anyone in order to keep what was rightfully mine. The gossip didn't stop. I heard relatives were calling me difficult, stubborn, disrespectful to my parents. A distant cousin messaged me, saying, "I never thought you could do that to your own sister." I didn't reply, because for the first time in my life, I knew my silence was no longer submission. It was me standing up. In silence. With evidence, with clarity, and with a self-respect that no longer negotiated. 3 days later, over the weekend, I received an invitation to a small family gathering at my aunt's house, a casual potluck dinner, supposedly for the birthday of someone I barely knew. I knew Emma and Logan would be there. And I knew my parents would pretend nothing had ever happened. I wore a simple black dress, my hair neatly tied back. No makeup, no jewelry except for the silver ring my grandfather gave me when I turned 16. I brought an envelope, and I said nothing until the evening was nearly over, just as Emma stood surrounded by the aunts, laughing brightly as she recounted her honeymoon stories, while my mother sat at the corner of the table, idly turning her iced tea as if deep in thought. I walked over and placed the envelope gently on the table in front of my parents. No raised voice, no drama. "You should listen to this. And if this is the kind of family you want me to sacrifice for, then at the very least, you deserve to know who you're asking me to protect." My father looked at me, about to speak, but I stepped back calmly. I didn't wait for their reaction. My mother opened the envelope, unfolded the printed transcript, and her eyes scanned the lines quickly. Her face turned pale. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone and played the voice clip I had forwarded privately to both her and Dad. No one spoke for nearly a full minute. When Emma's voice filled the room, sweet, calculated, shameless, the entire gathering fell silent. A few relatives put their forks down. Logan, mid-pour, froze with the water pitcher still suspended in the air. Emma, standing barely 5 meters away from me, turned her head, her expression briefly confused, then hardened into defense. "That was edited," she said loudly. "It was a private joke between me and Logan." I was joking. "Olivia, are you really going to twist something out of context just to humiliate me in front of the entire family?" I looked her straight in the eye. "I haven't said a word. You said it. How people choose to understand it, that's up to them." And she tried to speak again, but my father stood up. For the first time in months, he didn't look at me. He turned to Emma, voice hoarse. "Emma, is it true you said that?" Emma stammered. I didn't think anyone would take it so seriously. I was just upset in the moment." My mother said nothing. She lowered her head, quietly dabbing her eyes with a tissue. And me? I just stood there. Still, not a trace of satisfaction. Because I knew this moment wasn't about revenge, it was about closure. Whispers began to ripple through the family. An aunt muttered, "My God, so it was true?" A distant uncle sighed. Everyone thought Olivia was being difficult. Turns out they were playing her from the beginning. I didn't wait for the party to end. I nodded briefly, then walked out. Not to escape, but to leave, with the posture of someone who had finally been seen. On the drive home, I rolled the window down, letting the wind rush through my hair. Not because I felt relief, but because I was finally letting go of something heavy, the burden of needing to prove anything. I had done enough. The truth had been revealed. And from now on, whoever chooses to believe what, that's their choice. As for me, I choose to believe in myself. And for the first time, I knew I had won. Not by shouting, but by staying silent at the exact right moment. 6 months later, I stood in front of my little bookshop, coffee in hand, watching people stroll through a quiet street in the suburbs of Portland. A simple wooden sign hung above the glass door. Fern and Firelight, a place to begin again. I chose that name not because it was poetic, but because it was true. Ferns survive in the shade. Firelight, that was the warmth I had to build with my own hands, after everything. This bookshop had once been a vague dream I tucked away in college, a place where no one fought for the spotlight, where the pages spoke the words I couldn't say to my family. Now, it was real, small, yes, but enough to feel like I finally existed, fully. Aside from running the store, I started writing a blog. At first, it was just scattered posts to vent. But gradually, letters began to arrive from strangers, mostly women, saying they, too, had once been called cold for setting boundaries, or blamed for refusing to carry responsibilities that were never theirs. I called the blog Quiet Rebellion because that's exactly what it was. No shouting, no fighting, just walking away at the right time. I never mentioned Emma on the blog. Never spoke Logan's name. I didn't spell out the story. But anyone who had lived through what I had would understand. I simply wrote, family is not a place where you're forced to forget your self-worth just to preserve someone else's comfort. If staying silent means losing yourself, you have the right to speak. And if someone says you should sacrifice, ask them, why is it always you? I heard Emma and Logan canceled their honeymoon after the dinner at my aunt's. They had planned to go to France, but couldn't afford the deposit once the family wedding gift fell through. A few weeks later, they moved out of the upscale apartment they had just rented, settling into a small studio on the outskirts. A former friend of Emma's once messaged me. She still doesn't get it, still tells people you're too sensitive. I didn't care. Not anymore. My parents sent a handwritten letter, my mother's shaky handwriting, thick paper, blue ink, filled with clumsy apologies. We're sorry for making you feel alone in your own family. We didn't realize how deeply we put you in an impossible position. We were wrong, and now we can only hope that someday you'll forgive us. I folded the letter and placed it gently into the wooden drawer beneath the register. I didn't tear it. But I didn't reply either. Forgiveness doesn't always require a conversation. Sometimes, forgiveness is simply choosing not to carry the anger any further. These days, I wake up early, open the shop at 8 a.m., switch on the warm yellow lights, arrange the books along the shelves, then pour tea from the old clay teapot my grandfather used to own. There are familiar customers now, a literature teacher, a retired doctor, a few college students who like to tap away on their laptops in the quiet. They know nothing of my past, and I never tell them. Here, I'm just Olivia, the owner of a small bookshop. Not Emma's sister. Not the difficult child. I have a quiet corner behind the store, just a small table, a few notebooks, and one black and white photograph. Me and Grandpa, taken on my 16th birthday. We're both laughing, sunlight dotting our faces, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. When I feel tired, I look at it to remind myself that once, there was someone who believed in me without conditions. Sometimes I still dream of the old house, of my mother calling from the kitchen, of the feeling of hearing my name spoken with care, but then I wake up, and I know. This place, however small, is mine. No one has the right to take it. No one can define me by the role they wished I had played. Victory doesn't come when people fall to their knees to apologize. It comes when you no longer need their apology to keep going. And maybe, for the first time in my life, I feel free. A freedom not born from leaving someone behind, but from returning fully to myself, quietly, completely. I'm not telling this story to complain. I'm telling it so that if you've ever been labeled difficult or selfish just because you refused to let go of something you truly deserved, you'll know you're not alone. If you've ever been asked to step aside, to give up your share, your voice, your feelings so someone else could be called the pride of the family, then you're not unfamiliar. You are me. And I am you. And if you're sitting there, reading these words, feeling that familiar tightness in your chest, maybe it's time for you to stand up too. Stand. Hold on to what is yours. And if someone calls you selfish, smile, because that's the moment they realize they no longer have control over you. And finally, I want to leave one message just for you, the person who needs to hear this more than anyone. You don't need to sacrifice any more just to be called kind. Okay. You don't need to stay silent any longer just to be called well-behaved. You don't have to keep reaching out to hold together a family that's been letting go of you, piece by piece. You are worthy. That's it. That's the truth. And if you feel seen by what I just shared, leave this one line under the video. I deserve to keep what's mine. So I'll know you're here. So you can remind yourself that you no longer need to give more just to prove you're enough. Because you, just as you are already are.